The Canadian failure to take control of the Beveland Isthmus via the lowlands led to a rethinking of their approach on how to dislodge the Fallschirmjäger of the 6th Regiment from the vicinity. After being repulsed 2 times in the flatlands of the polders, it was time to explore the possibilities of attacking from the high ground. The solution was found in an attack on Woensdrecht. Woensdrecht was a village on the most western part of the high ground, rising 20 meters above sea level from its highest natural point. Those who would control Woensdrecht would be able to dominate the lowlands below. With a close-up of the area, the differences in height in the area become more clear, and with it the importance of Woensdrecht, most notably the little round top north of the village. This was the main target of the attack on Woensdrecht. Once the village and its vicinity was under firm control of the Canadians, they could attack in all directions to unhinge the German front line. In order to increase the chance of success, the Canadians committed fresh troops. The Essex Scottish and the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry had already been deployed at Heydte in anticipation of the planned attack on October 13th. Back then, Lieutenant Colonel Whittaker, the commander of the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, had managed to postpone their attack, but now the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, nicknamed the Rileys, was expected to carry the attack towards Woensdrecht. In order to prepare for the attack, Whittaker performed a personal aerial reconnaissance with his company commanders, flying over Woensdrecht itself. They also gathered intelligence regarding the German strength from villagers, who told them that there were several dozen up to 100 soldiers with low morale. These were the remnants of the 15th Army Weapons Battalion, which had taken heavy losses. Together with the artillery support of over 100 guns, the approximately 400 men of the Rileys were confident they could overrun the weak German defenses. They were convinced that they would attack the weak spot in the German front line. The Germans were, however, not sitting idle. The civilian population of Woensdrecht was evacuated on October 15th, and they had every reason to do so, because the Canadian intelligence reports drew heavily on what civilians told them. Members of the population reported the German strength and positions in Woensdrecht village in great detail. The Canadians estimated the German strength at several dozen regular infantrymen. The problem was, however, that they didn't know what the German paratroopers had in store for them. The Canadians just knew that the Germans in front of them were regulars and that these paratroopers were present in the vicinity, but they expected that these were overstretched over at least 4 kilometers of front line between the airfield in the east and the railway dam in the west. Von der Heydte masterminded a defense with certain weak points, so he could guide Canadian attacks towards preset battlegrounds to make use of his resources. The 15th Weapons Battalion at Heydte was just a bait to lure the Canadians into a trap. In the early hours of October 16th, he was alerted to suspicious Canadian activity in the Woensdrecht sector and started to rally all available reserves. His 1st battalion had to give up 2 companies. The 3rd company would move in from the east with 2 assault guns, while the 16th company would come in from the north with 3 assault guns. And last but not least, the 1st company would move in from the west. Meanwhile, the Canadians had planned to advance quickly and prevent the German paratroopers from getting the upper hand. The first surprise was an intensive artillery bombardment. More than 150 guns were blazing at the German positions in and around Woensdrecht for at least 1 hour. The Canadians began their attack around 4:30, and initially there was ground for optimism. 2 infantry companies attacked from Marche into Woensdrecht under the protection of a creeping artillery barrage and with the support of a squadron of German tanks from the Fort Garry Horse. This rout was probably chosen due to the availability of a solid road for the supporting tanks. In any case, the remnants of the 15th Weapons Battalion were stunned by the initial bombardment and started wavering. Dozens of Germans surrendered as a result of the Canadian onslaught. As a reminder, the battalion came to Heydte at October 8th, and the fighting during the morning of October 16th basically meant the end of this unit as a frontline combat unit. At first glance, it looked like von der Heydte deliberately sacrificed the remnants of Wehrmacht units in his sector to avoid exposure of his own Fallschirmjäger to bear the full brunt of the Canadian artillery and subsequent attack. But von der Heydte had been busy mustering a sizable force of paratroopers and supporting assault guns to conduct a counter-strike. By 9 o'clock, the Canadians had taken most of the village and the surrounding heights. The companies of the Rileys had fanned out over the area to take up positions along a 2-kilometer contact line. The battalion was, however, not full strength and had altogether just about 400 men to defend this perimeter, or roughly 1 man for every 5 meters. The Rileys were in other words exhausted and in a vulnerable exposed position. This is when von der Heydte's unit struck the Canadian positions. The 3rd Company attacked from the east in an effort to get to Heydte with the support of an assault gun. This attack was initially promising and the German paratroopers climbed on the assault gun to storm into Heydte itself with blazing guns. The Germans had however recently mined this access, and the assault gun ran on such a mine, which set off the ammunition in the vehicle, killing the paratroopers on top of it in the process. This attack was aborted as a result. The 16th Company was more fortunate. The company was supported by no less than 3 assault guns. This company, under the command of Lieutenant Wiegand, had been instrumental in the defeat of the Royal Regiment of Canada on October 10th at the Beverland Isthmus. Now this company was brought in for a counter-strike against the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry on the furthest edge of the perimeter. Wiegand's company consisted only of 15 men, which meant that they were fewer in number than their opponents, but the support by 3 assault guns gave Wiegand's men an unassailable advantage over the Rileys, which had no armored support in this sector. At 10 o'clock, the Fallschirmjäger unleashed their attack on the unfortunate A Company. The assault gun shut up the company HQ, and the ferocity of the German attack broke the back of the A Company. Dozens of men surrendered, and the rest of the company hastily withdrew to the positions of C Company, where the demoralized remnants had to be prevented from fleeing by officers with their pistols drawn. Following these dramatic events, tanks from the 4th Gary Horse were called in to support the defenders against the Fallschirmjäger and their assault guns. These tanks did not deter the Fallschirmjäger, who were bolstered by their initial success. Von der Heydte personally led the attack of the 1st Company from the east with an assault gun to storm Heydte. The German follow-up attack against C Company was as ferocious as their initial attack against the A Company, and it came to intense hand-to-hand fighting. The C Company HQ came under fire, but an anti-tank gun managed to knock out at least 1 assault gun. Nevertheless, the C Company was under such heavy pressure that its commander, Major Piggott, saw no other recourse than to call fire upon his own position. The ensuing barrage of more than 100 guns caught the Germans in the open, and as a result, it was largely wiped out. The Germans had enough and stumbled back to their own lines to lick their wounds. The Canadians were shocked and requested dozens of airplanes to constantly patrol the skies over Woensdrecht and drop bombs on anything that moved. Wiegand's 16th Company had also suffered significant losses and had only a few dozen men left. Despite the physical exhaustion and the heavy losses, von der Heydte insisted that Wiegand resume the attack to take back the strategic hilltop where D Company was located. The Fallschirmjäger would attempt his attack just before dusk, to avoid being spotted by Allied airplanes. They carried out a surprise attack on the unsuspecting D Company. A Canadian platoon was overrun, but despite this short-lived success, there was no real threat like in the eastern sector. The Germans in this sector had no assault guns, nor the numbers to dislodge the Canadians. Wiegand became wounded himself and was carried to his own lines on the shoulders of a giant Canadian prisoner of war. This was the end of what turned out to be a long day for both sides. The Royal Hamilton Light Infantry had suffered heavy losses on October 16th, and this was evident from the roll call at the end of the day. A Company had only 19 men left, B Company 41 men, C Company 42 men, and D Company 61 men. If we take into account that the battalion started the battle with 400 combat troops, and for the sake of simplicity think that every company had 100 men, the losses become evident. The A Company was almost wiped out, while the other two companies had only a third of their organic strength left. D Company could boast to be the strongest with almost half of its strength left, but that's after having lost a third of its strength. The Rileys managed to hold Woensdrecht in the days following the battle despite regular mortar fire and sniping from the Fallschirmjäger, but the battalion was burned out and no longer capable of any meaningful offensive action. It was the 3rd Battalion within 1 week which was badly mauled after a confrontation with the 6th Parachute Regiment. The Royal Regiment of Canada, the Black Watch, all preceded the Rileys. The German paratroopers had also taken a toll, and most companies of the 1st Battalion were down to several dozen men. Nevertheless, the Canadians were pinned down and a rotation of units was necessary to bring up fresh units for our next push, as we shall see in the next episode.